Good evening, dear listener. Pull your armchair closer to the hearth, pour a cup of Earl Grey, and let the snow fall softly outside. Tonight, in the snug village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple unpicks a mystery as delicate as lace, yet as deadly as frostbite. A blizzard seals the lanes, a secret thaws in the dark, and the quietest cottage hides the loudest truth. Welcome to Miss Marple and the Blizzard Death Secret. Chapter 1. The Snowbound Village. The blizzard descended upon St. Mary Mead with the suddenness of a curtain falling at the village hall. It began on Friday afternoon, just as Mrs. Price was setting out her Victoria sponge for the Women's Institute tea, and by evensong the sky had turned the colour of wet slate. Snowflakes, fat as mothballs, swirled past the mullioned windows of the vicarage and piled against the war memorial until even the bronze soldier's bayonet vanished beneath a sugary drift. The wireless crackled with warnings: motorists are advised to remain at home. Yet, in the snug confines of Danemead Cottage, Miss Jane Marple paid the storm little heed. She sat by her fire, spectacles perched on the end of her nose, knitting a scarlet mitten with the calm precision of a watchmaker. The kettle on the hob sang a gentle counterpoint to the wind's howl, and the room smelled of beeswax, lavender, and the faint sweetness of the Madeira cake cooling on the dresser. Outside, the lane was a ribbon of untouched white. The postman's bicycle tracks from morning had already softened at the edges, and the milk float's twin ruts were filling fast. Only the church clock, striking 4 with its usual punctilious cough, reminded the village that time still marched beneath the snow. Miss Marple paused in her knitting to listen. 4 o'clock, tea time at the Grange, where old Mrs. Bantry's companion, Miss Eleanor Greenshaw, would be presiding over the silver teapot with the air of a dowager duchess. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Miss Greenshaw had a tongue sharp enough to slice cake, but her heart, well, that was another matter. A sharp rap at the door startled the tabby cat from its slumber on the hearthrug. Miss Marple set aside her needles and opened to find Constable Pork snowed to his knees, helmet askew, and his usually ruddy cheeks blanched with cold and something deeper, consternation. "Miss Marple," he puffed, stamping boots that left crescents of slush on the mat, "begging your pardon, but there's trouble at the Grange. Miss Greenshaw's been found dead in the library, door locked from the inside, windows bolted, coal fire stone cold. Dr. Haydock says heart failure, but—" He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The will's gone missing, and the footprints, well, you'd best come see." Miss Marple's blue eyes sharpened behind her spectacles. "Footprints, Constable, in this weather?" "Only one set," Park said grimly, "leading in through the side door. None coming out, and the snow on the library sill is smooth as a christening blanket." She fetched her galoshes, her woolly scarf the colour of damson jam, and her sensible navy coat with the fox fur collar. "Then we must tread carefully," she murmured, pulling on gloves. "Snow keeps secrets better than any diary." The walk to the Grange was a trial, even for Miss Marple's sturdy legs. The lane had become a tunnel of white, hedgerows bowed under their burden like penitents. The Grange itself loomed ahead, a sprawling Elizabethan manor with gables sharp as witches' hats and chimneys exhaling pale smoke into the swirl. Colonel Bantry's Rolls was buried to its hubs in the drive. Only the brass mascot, a leaping salmon, poked through the drift like a periscope. The side door stood ajar, a rectangle of yellow light spilling onto the snow. Inside, The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and coal dust. The library door at the end of the passage was closed, a policeman's notebook propped against it like a makeshift seal. Dr. Haydock emerged, black bag in hand, his face grave beneath the deerstalker. Natural causes, I'd say, he told Polk, though his eyes flicked to Miss Marple with the wariness of a man who knew her reputation. Heart gave out, probably around 4 o'clock. She was 72 after all, and the cold. Miss Marple slipped past him into the library. The room was a cavern of leather-bound volumes and faded brocade, the fire grate swept clean, ashes grey and cold. Miss Eleanor Greenshaw sat in a high-backed wing chair, her head fallen forward as though in prayer. She wore her usual bottle green velvet, the cameo brooch at her throat catching the lamplight. A half-finished crossword lay on her lap, the pencil still clutched in stiff fingers. A teacup, cold, untouched, balanced precariously on the chair's arm. But it was the white camellia in her other hand that caught Miss Marple's attention, its petals bruised as though crushed in a fist, a single drop of moisture trembling at the heart. From the conservatory, Miss Marple murmured, "Yet the hothouse door has been ice shut since Friday noon." She knelt, heedless of her arthritis, and examined the hearthrug. A smudge of green paint, fresh as verdigris, marred the faded roses, precisely the shade of the conservatory door. The French windows were bolted top and bottom. The snow on the outer sill lay in a perfect, wind-sculpted wave. No disturbance, no exit. In the drawing room, the suspects had gathered like players awaiting curtain call, their breath fogging the air. Miss Dolly Bantry, Colonel Bantry's flustered spinster sister, twisted a handkerchief into knots. Mr. Raymond West, Miss Marple's novelist nephew, stood by the mantel in a mustard waistcoat, striking poses for an audience of none. Mrs. Price, the housekeeper, stood ramrod straight in starched black, her face a mask of loyal grief. Dr. Lloyd, the village GP, warmed his hands at the fire, his eyes shadowed. Tamsin Wren, the parlour-maid, hovered by the tea trolley, pretty as a Dresden shepherdess and twice as nervous. Miss Marple entered quietly, shaking snow from her scarf. "A tragic business," she said, her voice soft as thistledown. "Yet the camellia puzzles me. Miss Greenshaw disliked cut flowers, said they reminded her of funerals." Dolly Bantry fluttered. Eleanor was peculiar about such things, but she was alive at 4. I brought her the post. She was signing papers, said the will was safely hidden. Then I left by the side door. The snow was already deep. Raymond lit a cigarette with theatrical nonchalance. I was in the study, typing. Heard nothing. The blizzard drowns everything. Mrs. Price's chin lifted. Preparing high tea in the kitchen. The dumbwaiter was stuck, ice in the shaft. Dr. Lloyd cleared his throat. I called at 3, prescribed a sedative for her nerves. She refused, said she'd settle affairs first. Tamsin's voice was barely a whisper. I brought coal at 5. The library door was locked. She called through, "Leave it outside." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the camellia pot by the window. One stem was broken, sap still glistening. "Curious," she said. "Someone entered after the blizzard began, and the footprints, Constable." "Tell me again." Polk shifted. "One set, ma'am. Small boot, size 4 perhaps, leading from the kitchen to the library side door. None returning." Miss Marple smiled, a small, knowing curve. "Then the snow has not finished its tale. Let us wait for the thaw." Outside, the wind dropped to a sigh, and the snow began to fall in earnest, soft, relentless, sealing St. Mary Mead in its white embrace. Chapter 2. The vanishing will snowflakes, the size of communion wafers, drifted past the library windows of the Grange, each one catching the lamplight like a tiny, fleeting star before melting into oblivion on the sill. Monday had dawned with a hush so profound that the creak of Miss Marple's galoshes on the frozen path sounded like a gunshot. Inside, the air still carried the ghost of Miss Greenshaw's violet talc, now laced with the sharper tang of cold ashes and the metallic whisper of secrets. Constable Polk had stationed P.C. Dodd at the door with a thermos that steamed like a dragon's breath. But the young man's vigilance was wasted. The blizzard had sealed the manor tighter than any lock. Miss Marple entered the library alone, her navy coat dusted with frost, her knitting bag slung over one arm like a doctor's satchel. The wing chair stood shrouded in its dust sheet, a pale ghost in the gloom, but the crossword on the blotter demanded attention. Clue 12. A cross, frozen asset, answered in Miss Greenshaw's spidery hand. Ice. The pencil lay beside it, its tip snapped clean, as though the writer had pressed too hard in a moment of agitation. Miss Marple lifted the paperweight, a jade, elephant, trunk raised in eternal salute, and turned the puzzle to the light. The ink was fresh, the loops of the sea still glossy, written after the storm began then. Curious. She knelt by the hearth, arthritis be damned, and brushed the ashes with a gloved finger. Cold, yes, but not uniformly so. A pocket of warmth lingered in the bricks, as though someone had poked the fire long after the heart had stopped. A smudge of green paint marred the hearthrug's faded roses, verdigris, mixed with linseed oil, the exact shade of the conservatory door. She scraped a flake into an envelope with the precision of a botanist collecting pollen. The teacup on the chair's arm drew her next. Cold Darjeeling, a skin of milk on the surface, and on the rim, a crescent of rose-pink lipstick. Miss Greenshaw had scorned cosmetics since the war. Her vanity had been her cameo alone. Miss Marple sniffed. Violets, yes, but beneath, something bitter, medicinal. She decanted a sample into a vial from her bag, corking it with a satisfying pop. The conservatory door stood ajar, exhaling the humid breath of camellias and damp earth. The bush itself was a riot of waxy white, but one stem had been snapped clean, sap beading like a tear. Footprints, small, narrow, led from the library's connecting door, circled the bush, then vanished into the snow toward the potting shed. Miss Marple followed, her galoshes crunching. The shed door hung open, a rectangle of yellow light spilling onto the drifts. Inside, seed trays neatly labelled, a hyacinth bulb half planted in a clay pot, and on the bench, a singed envelope addressed in Miss Greenshaw's hand to Miss D. Bantry, the Grange. The corner was charred. Inside, a fragment of cream paper. My faithful companion, Mrs. Price, to receive the residue. The rest consumed by flame. Back in the drawing room, the suspects had gathered like mismatched chess pieces around a board no one dared touch. Dolly Bantry twisted her handkerchief into a knot that would defy any sailor. Raymond West leaned against the mantel in his mustard waistcoat, striking poses for an audience of none. Mrs. Price stood ramrod straight, her face a fortress of loyalty. Dr. Lloyd warmed his hands at the fire, his eyes shadowed with the weariness of a man who had seen too many deaths. Tamsin Wren hovered by the tea trolley, her apron spotless, her cheeks flushed as though she'd run from the kitchen. Miss Marple entered quietly, shaking snow from her scarf. A tragic business, she said, her voice soft as thistledown. Yet the camellia puzzles me. Miss Greenshaw disliked cut flowers, said they reminded her of funerals. Dolly fluttered. Eleanor promised me 5,000, said it was in the will she signed Friday, but the solicitor's copy is blank where the bequest should be. Raymond lit a cigarette with theatrical languor. Aunt Jane, you'll sort it. I was in the study all afternoon, typing my new play. The Frozen Asset, ironically. Heard nothing but the blizzard. Mrs. Price's chin lifted. High tea at 5 sharp. The dumb waiter jammed. Ice in the shaft. I sent Tamsin with coal instead. Dr. Lloyd cleared his throat. I left at 3:15. Miss Greenshaw refused her sedative, said she'd settle affairs first. Her heart was weak. I warned her about excitement. Tamsin's voice was barely a whisper. I knocked at 5. Madam called through the door, leave the coal outside. Her voice was faint, but clear. Miss Marple's needles clicked. She had resumed the scarlet mitten, though her eyes never left the faces. The dumb waiter, she murmured. May I see? The kitchen was a cathedral of copper pans and the scent of roasting mutton. The dumb waiter, a brass tray on ropes, stood halfway between floors, frozen solid. Miss Marple tugged. The tray lurched, revealing a folded paper wedged beneath. The missing will, singed at one corner, but intact. The bequest to Mrs. Price was crossed out in fresh ink, beneath, in Miss Greenshaw's hand. To my niece, Dorothy Bantry, $5,000, the residue to charity. Mrs. Price's face drained to the colour of parchment. That's not the copy I witnessed Friday. She left me everything, said I'd earned it after 20 years. Miss Marple examined the ink, still tacky. Written after death, perhaps. The pen was in the library, nib bent from pressure. Someone forged the change, then hid the will here to be discovered later. She turned to the conservatory door. The broken pane was high, reachable only by standing on the wooden crate now pushed beneath the camellia bench. The crate bore a faint imprint of a boot heel, size 4 with a distinctive nail pattern, 3 in a triangle. Tamsin, your shoes. May I see the left sole? Tamsin flushed crimson, but obeyed. The nail pattern matched. I went back at 6, she whispered. Madam didn't answer. I thought she was sleeping. I locked the door from outside, key on the inside, posted through the letterbox, then retrieved it via the pane. I was afraid of scandal. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. You locked a door that was already locked, but the footprints looped back to the kitchen. Yet a second set, smaller, deeper, leads from the shed to the coal chute. Someone else walked in snowshoes, or carried them. She opened the coal chute. Inside, a pair of child-sized snowshoes, hand-carved, the leather strap still warm. And tucked beneath, a lace handkerchief monogrammed E.G., stained with green paint and a trace of violet talc. Miss Greenshaw did not die alone, Miss Marple said softly. Someone entered after the blizzard, left no prints by using these, then hid them here. The will was altered, the clock stopped, the camellia crushed to suggest a struggle that never was. But the tea, that tells the true tale. She held up the vial. Digitalis, dissolved. 3 tablets, not 1. A fatal dose, self-administered in error, or so it seems. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, sealing the secrets tighter. Chapter 3. The parlour-maid's secret. Tuesday broke over St. Mary Mead with the brittle clarity of a cracked bell. The blizzard had paused in its assault, leaving the village draped in a hush so complete that the drip of melting icicles from the eaves sounded like a metronome counting down to revelation. Miss Marple rose at dawn, her breath fogging the bedroom window as she peered through lace curtains at the transformed landscape. The lane was a canal of slush. The War Memorial's bronze soldier now wore a cocked hat of snow that tilted rakishly over one eye. She dressed with care, tweed skirt, cardigan the colour of heather, and the brooch her nephew Raymond had brought from Florence, a tiny enamelled violet that caught the pale light like a wink. Breakfast was a solitary affair. One poached egg, toast soldiers, and tea strong enough to stand a spoon. Yet her mind was not on the plate, but on the child-size snowshoes now wrapped in brown paper in her knitting bag. Hand-carved from ash wood, the leather strap still supple, used within the hour, then hidden in the coal chute. Someone in the Grange had a secret worth braving the storm for, and secrets, Miss Marple knew, were like bulbs. They pushed through the darkest soil to bloom at the most inconvenient moment. She arrived at the Grange as the church clock struck 9, her galoshes leaving a trail of determined prints. Constable Polk met her at the side door, his helmet under one arm, a mug of cocoa in the other. "Morning, Miss Marple. Dr. Haydock's with the coroner. Says the inquest'll be Thursday, but the family's in a proper state. Miss Bantry's threatening to call the chief constable." Miss Marple patted his arm. "Let her. Panic is a poor disguise for guilt, constable. Now the potting shed. Has it been disturbed?" Polk shook his head. "Locked since yesterday. Keys with Mrs. Price." The shed door yielded to the housekeeper's key with a reluctant groan. Inside, the paraffin heater had burned low, its flame a blue teardrop. The bench was exactly as Miss Marple had left it. The singed envelope, the hyacinth bulb, and, new, a small tin of green paint, lid ajar, brush still wet. She lifted the brush. The bristles were clogged with violet talc, the same scent that clung to the lace handkerchief. Someone had mixed pigment with powder to create a trail as deliberate as breadcrumbs. Footprints led from the bench to a wicker hamper beneath the potting table. Miss Marple opened it with the reverence of a priest unveiling relics. Inside, a child's pinafore, yellowed with age, the hem embroidered with tiny camellias in thread, now faded to ghost grey. A label sewn inside the collar read, "Eleanor Greenshaw, age 6, 1890. Beneath the pinafore, a miniature diary bound in cracked Morocco leather. The first entry, in a child's laborious hand. "Papa says I mustn't tell about the medicine. It makes my heart go pitter-pat, but Nanny Price says it's for my own good." Miss Marple's breath caught. Nanny Price, the same Mrs. Price who had served the Grange for 20 years. She turned the page. The final entry, dated 1890. "I hid the bottle in the camellia pot. Papa will be cross, but my heart is quiet now." The diary slipped from her fingers as Tamsin Wren appeared in the doorway, her face pale as skimmed milk. "Miss Marple, I came to fetch seeds for the windowsill. Madame liked her hyacinths early." Miss Marple closed the hamper gently. "Tamsin, the envelope in the shed. The 50 and the train ticket to London. For Johnny Price, yes." Tamsin's knees buckled. She caught the doorframe. "How did you?" "Madame promised to pay his debts if I kept quiet about the new will. She said Mrs. Price was to have everything, but then she changed it back to Miss Dolly. I was to post the letter Friday, but the blizzard." Miss Marple's voice was soft as lamb's wool. "You entered the library after 5, through the conservatory's broken pane." Tamsin nodded, tears spilling. "She was alive. Gave me the envelope, told me to lock the door behind me, for safety. I did. Then I heard her gasp, but the key was on the inside. I posted it back through the letterbox, retrieved it via the pane. I thought, if anyone found me, they'd say I killed her for the money. Miss Marple lifted the diary. This bottle, digitalis perhaps, hidden in the camellia pot when your mistress was a child. Mrs. Price was her nanny then. Tamsin wiped her eyes. Yes. Madam spoke of it once. Said Nanny saved her from a quack doctor's overdose. Kept the pinafore as a talisman. They returned to the library. The camellia pot by the window, modern terracotta, held a single white bloom. Miss Marple tipped it gently. Beneath the soil, wrapped in oilskin, lay a brown glass bottle, label faded but legible. Digitalis purpurea, 1-grain tablets, 1889. 3 tablets missing. Miss Marple, murmuring, 60 years later, the same poison, but who knew of the hiding place? In the drawing room, Mrs. Price was polishing the silver with a ferocity that set the candlesticks trembling. Miss Marple entered quietly, the diary in her hand. Mrs. Price, this pinafore, yours from 1890. The housekeeper's cloth stilled. Miss Eleanor's, I embroidered the camellias myself. She was a frail child. Heart trouble from birth. The doctor prescribed too much. I hid the bottle to save her. She never knew. Miss Marple opened the diary to the final page. Yet she found it. And yesterday, she found it again. Dissolved 3 tablets in her tea, believing it would quiet her heart for signing the will. A fatal miscalculation. Mrs. Price's face crumpled. I burned the first will, left me everything. Thought if I destroyed it, the old one would stand. I used the snowshoes from the attic, child's playthings from the Colonel's youth. Entered via the coal chute at 4:30 after Dr. Lloyd left. She was already slipping away. I stopped the clock, locked the door, posted the key, then forged the new bequest in the dumbwaiter. Dolly Bantry gasped from the doorway. You, my 5,000, was never yours, Mrs. Price said bitterly. Madam changed her mind Friday, said charity was safer than family. I only wanted what I'd earned. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the camellia. You crushed the flower in her hand to suggest a struggle. Mrs. Price nodded. To buy time. But the snowshoes, I hid them badly. Miss Marple smiled gently. The thaw will reveal all footprints, my dear. But the true trail was in the tea and the diary. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow to a dazzle of diamonds. Miss Marple returned to Danemead, the diary safe in her bag, the scarlet mitten nearly finished. The village stirred, children sledging on the green, the butcher's boy whistling as he cleared a path. Secrets, like snow, melted in the light. Chapter 4. The Doctor's Dilemma. Wednesday arrived in St. Mary Mead like a hesitant guest, the sky a washed-out blue with only a few tattered clouds clinging to the horizon. The thaw had begun in earnest. Snow slid from the rooftops in heavy slabs, and the gutters gurgled with the sound of secrets being rinsed away. Miss Marple stepped out of Dinemead Cottage at 8:30, her breath pluming in the crisp air, a basket over one arm containing scones still warm from the oven, and the brown glass bottle of digitalis wrapped in a tea towel. The lane was a patchwork of mud and ice. The milkman's horse slipped and snorted, its hooves clopping a nervous rhythm. She paused at the post office to collect her pension book and to listen. Mrs. Blade behind the counter was already recounting the latest from the Grange with the relish of a town crier. Mrs. Price confessed to tampering with the will, they say, but Dr. Lloyd's, in a proper state, called out twice in the night to old Mr. Finch at the almshouses. Heart trouble, same as Miss Greenshaw. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright as winter stars. Hearts are delicate instruments, Mrs. Blade, easily overwound. The Grange drive had been cleared by the gardener, a narrow path of gravel gleaming like a snail's trail. Inside, the house smelled of beeswax and damp wool. The drawing room fire roared, yet the atmosphere was colder than the snow outside. Dr. Lloyd stood by the window, his medical bag at his feet, staring at the camellia bush as though it might sprout answers. His face was drawn, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than yesterday. Miss Marple, offering the basket. "A scone, doctor. Baking is a solace in troubled times." Dr. Lloyd managed a wan smile. "You're kind, Miss Marple, but my appetite has fled. The coroner's preliminary report, digitalis poisoning, accidental overdose. Yet I prescribed 1 tablet daily. The bottle was full Friday." Miss Marple unwrapped the bottle, setting it on the mantel beside a porcelain shepherdess. 3 tablets missing, dissolved in tea, a fatal dose for a frail heart. But the teacup, lipstick on the rim, rose pink. Miss Greenshaw wore none. Dr. Lloyd's hand trembled as he lifted the bottle. "I left it on the mantel at 3:15. She refused the sedative, said she'd manage her own cure. I thought she meant rest." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the mantel clock, its hands frozen at 4:17. She tapped the glass. The mechanism ticked once, then resumed. 17 minutes fast. The real time of death. 4 o'clock. Before Tamsin's visit, before Mrs. Price's confession, someone accelerated the clock to create confusion. She opened the clock's face. Inside, a single camellia petal had been wedged behind the minute hand, its bruise now brown. Placed to stop the clock at 4:17, then removed when the forgery was complete. Dr. Lloyd sank into a chair. "I warned her about excitement. She was agitated, said she'd right an old wrong. I thought she meant the will." Miss Marple produced the child's diary from her bag. "This wrong began in 1890. Mrs. Price, then Nanny Price, hid the digitalis to save 6-year-old Eleanor from a quack's overdose. The bottle was forgotten in the camellia pot until Friday, when Miss Greenshaw unearthed it while pruning. She recognized the danger, yet took 3 tablets in tea, believing it would steady her for signing the will." Dr. Lloyd's voice cracked. "She asked me about dosage, said her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. I repeated, 1 tablet, but she was deaf to caution." In the conservatory, the camellia bush had been pruned with surgical precision, except the broken stem, now bandaged with gardener's tape. Miss Marple lifted the tape. Beneath, a tiny brass key taped to the stem, its bow shaped like a camellia. The key fit the locked drawer in Miss Greenshaw's escritoire. Inside, a second will, dated Saturday, witnessed by Tamsin Wren and the gardener. Bequest: $5,000 to Dolly Bantry, $1,000 to Dr. Lloyd for the village clinic, the residue to the St. Mary Mead orphanage. Miss Marple, softly. She changed her mind again. After Mrs. Price's betrayal, signed this in secret, hid the key in the bush, but someone saw. Dolly Bantry burst in, cheeks flushed from the cold. Eleanor's solicitor telephoned. This morning's post. The orphanage gets everything. Mrs. Price's confession was a smokescreen. She burned the wrong will. Raymond West followed, manuscript under arm. Aunt Jane, my play, the frozen asset, needs a new ending. This is gold. Miss Marple ignored him, turning to Dr. Lloyd. You visited at 3, left the digitalis, returned at what time? Dr. Lloyd hesitated. 6:30. The side door was unlocked. I found her, already gone. I checked her pulse, closed her eyes. Then, I stopped the clock. Thought to spare the family a midnight inquest. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. You forged nothing, Doctor, but you moved the body, propped her in the chair, placed the camellia in her hand to suggest peace. A kindness, perhaps, but it obscured the truth. Dr. Lloyd bowed his head. I panicked. The lipstick, mine, from my bag. I thought to make her presentable. In the kitchen, Tamsin was icing a cake with trembling hands. Miss Marple entered quietly. The 50 sol. Johnny's debts paid. Tamsin nodded. Madam gave it Friday. Said Mrs. Price deserved nothing after prying. I witnessed the orphanage will Saturday morning. Miss Marple opened the dumbwaiter. The singed will was gone, replaced by a fresh envelope addressed to the solicitor, postmarked yesterday. Inside, the orphanage will, and a note in Miss Greenshaw's hand. If I die before posting Tamsin, deliver this, forgive my folly. Miss Marple, to the room. Miss Greenshaw poisoned herself by mistake, 3 tablets for a flutter. Dr. Lloyd found her, staged a peaceful scene. Mrs. Price burned the wrong will, forged another. Tamsin posted the true one in secret. The snowshoes, the clock, the camellia, all threads in a tapestry of good intentions gone awry. Outside, the sun melted, the last of the snow, from the camellias, revealing the green shoots of spring. Miss Marple returned home. The second mitten finished. The village at peace. Chapter 5. The Camellia Confession. Chapter 5. The Camellia Confession. Word count, 1:27. Thursday dawned in St. Mary Mead with the tender promise of crocuses pushing through the thawing earth, their purple heads nodding like conspirators in the weak sunlight. The village green steamed gently, snow retreating into patchy islands that revealed the first brave blades of grass. Miss Marple walked to the Grange at 10 o'clock, her basket swinging. The second will tucked safely inside beside a jar of blackberry jam and a pair of knitted bed socks for Dolly Bantry. The air carried the scent of wet wool and wood smoke. The butcher's boy whistled green sleeves as he swept his step, and the vicar's wife waved from her gate with a trowel in hand. Normalcy, Miss Marple reflected, was the village's most potent restorative. The Grange drawing room had been transformed into a tribunal of velvet chairs and anxious faces. Constable Polk stood by the door, notebook poised. The coroner, a thin man with a voice like dry leaves, sat at the escritoire. Dolly Bantry clutched a lace handkerchief, already sodden. Raymond West lounged in an armchair, scribbling notes for his play. Mrs. Price stood behind the tea trolley, her apron starched to a blade. Dr. Lloyd perched on the window seat, staring at the camellia bush as though it might absolve him. Tamsin Wren hovered with a tray of cups that rattled like bones. Miss Marple entered quietly, setting her basket on the table. Good morning. The thaw has been kind to us all. The coroner cleared his throat. Miss Marple, your statement. She raised a hand, gentle but firm. First, the camellia. She lifted the bruised bloom from its vase, its petals now the colour of old parchment. Picked Friday, hidden in the conservatory until Saturday. Miss Greenshaw intended it as a signal, peace, for the orphanage children who would inherit. But the bruise came later, when Dr. Lloyd placed it in her hand. Dr. Lloyd flinched. I only meant to spare distress, Miss Marple finished. You found her at 6:30, already gone. Propped her in the chair, closed her eyes, added the flower from the bush, the lipstick on the teacup. Yours, from your bag, to make her presentable. A kindness, doctor, but it muddled the timeline. She turned to Mrs. Price. You entered at 4:30 via the coal chute, using the Colonel's childhood snowshoes. Saw her slipping away. Digitalis overdose. Stopped the clock at 4:17 to suggest a later death. Locked the door, posted the key through the letterbox, then forged the will in the dumbwaiter, crossing out your bequest. Mrs. Price's voice was a whisper. She'd promised me everything Friday, then changed it Saturday. I burned the wrong copy in panic. Miss Marple opened the second will. This is the true document, witnessed by Tamsin and the gardener. $5,000 to Miss Bantry, $1,000 to Dr. Lloyd for the clinic, the residue to the orphanage. Posted by Tamsin yesterday as instructed. Tamsin's eyes shone. Madam gave me the envelope Saturday. Said if anything happened, post it. I thought she meant illness, not death by misadventure, Miss Marple said softly. She unearthed the 1889 Digitalis Friday while pruning, recognized it from her childhood diary, took 3 tablets in tea at 3:45, believing it would steady her heart for signing. A tragic error. Dolly Bantry dabbed her eyes. Eleanor was always stubborn about medicine, thought she knew better than doctors. Raymond closed his notebook. Aunt Jane, you've given me the perfect ending, the Camellia confession, tragedy without villainy. Miss Marple smiled. No villains, only human frailty. Mrs. Price's loyalty turned to greed, Dr. Lloyd's compassion to concealment, Tamsin's love for Johnny to secrecy. The snowshoes, the clock, the lipstick, all threads in a tapestry of good intentions. The coroner nodded. Verdict, death by misadventure. The will stands. Mrs. Price sank into a chair, relief and shame mingling. Dr. Lloyd stood, offering his hand. The clinic will bear her name, Eleanor Greenshaw Ward. Tamsin poured tea with steady hands now. Johnny's debts are paid. He starts at the garage Monday. Miss Marple accepted a cup. And the camellia bush. Plant a new one in the orphanage garden. White blooms for remembrance. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the last snow from the camellias. The bush stood bare but unbroken, its roots deep in the past, its future bright with children's laughter. Miss Marple walked home through the slush, the bedsocks delivered, the jam shared, the village at peace. At Dynamede, she hung her coat, set the kettle to sing, and opened her knitting bag. The scarlet mittens were finished, perfect, warm, ready for the orphanage. She placed them in a parcel with a note, for small hands that need warmth, e.g. The church clock struck 12, its chime clear across the green. Miss Marple poured tea, added 1 sugar, and raised her cup to the window. To camellias, she murmured, and to hearts that beat too fast, then find their rhythm in forgiveness. The village settled into spring, secrets melted with the snow, and Miss Marple's garden began to stir. Crocuses first, then snowdrops, then the promise of daffodils. Life, like tea, was best when shared.